అందరికీ నమస్కారం. सबको नमस्कार. About G20 Brazil 2024. G20 is the group of 20 is the premium forum for international economic cooperation. It plays an important role in shaping and strengthening global architecture and governance on all major international economic issues. Origins of G20. In 1999, in the wake of the 1997 economic crisis, the G7 finance ministers announced the creation of the group of G20, aimed at including other countries in their discussions related to global economics and finance. The first official meeting was held in Berlin in December that same year. G20 Brazil 2024. The series of bilateral meetings at the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro highlights India's proactive stance on global cooperation and its efforts to build resilient, future-oriented partnerships. The objective of G20. The group of G20 is the premier forum for international economic cooperation. It plays an important role in shaping and strengthening global architecture and governance on all major international crises. India held the presidency of the G20 from 1st December 2022 to 30 November 2023. Under the Brazilian presidency, the G20 in 2024 will focus on the theme Building a Just World and Sustainable Planet. Each G20 presidency includes the organization of ministerial meetings on each of the main focus areas of the forum. Bharat at G20 Summit Brazil 2024. Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi landed in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil to take part in the G20 summit. To participate in the summit, deliberations and fruitful talks with various world leaders. Prime Minister deeply touched by the warm and lively welcome from the Indian community upon arriving in Rio de Janeiro. Their energy reflects the affection that binds us across continents. Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi received warm welcome from the President Lula at the G20 summit Rio de Janeiro. Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi have meetings with many world leaders at the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. Number 1. A wonderful interaction with Prime Minister Lawrence Wong of Singapore during the G20 summit. Number 2. Prime Minister met UN Secretary General Mr. Antonio Guterres at the Rio G20 summit. Number 3. Prime Minister had a respectful interaction with the President of the Government of Spain, Mr. Pedro Sanchez. Number 4. Commendable initiative by the Brazilian G20 presidency for launching the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty at the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. This collaborative initiative marks a significant stride towards ensuring food security and uplifting vulnerable communities worldwide. India assures full support to this effort. Number 5. At the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro, Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi spoke at the session on the fight against hunger and poverty. This is an important subject and success in this sector will contribute greatly towards sustainable progress. Prime Minister talked about India's efforts, notably how we collectively worked to remove 250 million people from the clutches of poverty. Number 6. Prime Minister had a very good meeting with President Prabowo Subianto during the G20 summit in Brazil. Number 7. Prime Minister had a very good meeting with Prime Minister of Portugal, Mr. Luis Montenegro. Number 8. Prime Minister had a very good meeting with Prime Minister Giorgio Meloni on the silence of the Rio de Janeiro G20 summit. Talks centered around deepening ties in defense, security, trade, and technology. Number 9. The meeting with Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Store of Norway was excellent. Number 10. Prime Minister had a very good meeting with President Emmanuel Macron. Complimented him on the successful hosting of the Paris Olympics and Paralympics earlier this year. Talked about how India and France will keep working closely in sectors like space, energy, AI, and other such futuristic areas. Our nations will also work closely to enhance people-to-people linkages. Number 11. Prime Minister had an extremely productive meeting with United Kingdom Prime Minister Keir Starmer in Rio de Janeiro. Number 12. Prime Minister had great interaction with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi of Egypt during the first day of the Rio G20 summit. Number 13. Prime Minister met President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen. Number 14. Prime Minister had an extremely productive meeting with the President of South Korea Mr. Yoon Suk Yeol during the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. Number 15. Prime Minister held talks with President Lula during the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. Complimented him on various efforts of Brazil during their G20 presidency. Both leaders took stock of the full range of bilateral ties between our nations and reaffirmed our commitment to improving cooperation in sectors like energy, biofuels, defense, agriculture, and more. Number 16. Prime Minister had an extremely productive meeting with the President of Chile, Mr. Gabriel Boric Font in Rio de Janeiro. Number 17. Prime Minister had an outstanding meeting with President Javier Milei of Argentina. Number 18. At the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro, Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi spoke on a topic which is very important for the future of the planet: sustainable development and energy transition. Prime Minister reiterated India's steadfast commitment to the Sustainable Development Agenda. Over the past decade, India has undertaken numerous initiatives in sectors like housing, water resources, energy, and sanitation, which have contributed to a more sustainable future. Number 19. Prime Minister had a very good meeting with Bola Ahmed Tinubu, President of Nigeria. Number 20. Prime Minister had an extremely productive meeting with Anthony Albanese, Prime Minister of Australia. Number 21. Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi with the G20 leaders at the productive Rio de Janeiro summit. అందరికీ ధన్యవాదాలు. सबको धन्यवाद. If content is good, click on subscribe, click on bell symbol, click on all notifications. Thanks for your support. Jai Hind.